Guys, so we are going to do a quick speed read of Dan Schneider's defamation filing against Quiet on the Set, Warner Brothers, the whole gang. The reason I really wanted to do this, and it will be on you guys because I don't know much about this case. I don't know much about the documentary. I haven't seen it. I've caught a lot of details when I open up X and see things on my timeline, but that's really about it. And I didn't really watch a lot of Nickelodeon shows after, SpongeBob, Fairly Odd Parents era. So it's really outside of my purview. But I saw the news and I was looking through multiple articles, and it was all just someone reporting what someone else was reporting. And finally, after going through like 2.5 pages of search results on Google, Deadline actually provided the copy of the complaint. That is going to be in the description if you want to just jump to reading it. But shout out to them because I always do think it's interesting when there's big fanfare when someone is accused of something. But when that person responds, there's very slim and constrained coverage of it. And I don't have any skin in this game, but I dislike when the media does that. That's it. So we're going to go through this. It's a blind read for me, although I have looked at some of the attorneys. So Jana Moser, maybe it's Mosier, not sure. She's young. I always think it's interesting when you have someone of the opposite sex coming in to represent you. There was in the Johnny Depp trial, there was Camille Vasquez, and there's a strategy behind having another woman question the person that is accusing their ex-boyfriend or ex-partner or someone that, they're accusing of some type of SA. So that's just interesting. Not sure if there's any other reason than that. She doesn't really list a lot of her accolades here. There's also an application for Pro Hoc Vice status for Jerry Silver, who you might recognize because he was doing some legal work for Adam Levine and Jerry Seinfeld and a ton of other organizations. So that's a little bit of background here. But, oh no, are we fuzzy? Hold on. Maybe. Fuzzy like background noise or like, what do you call it when there's like feedback? Let's see. Maybe it's better because I use NVIDIA Broadcast. Oh no, like staticky. Reverb. Oh, I'm gonna die on the inside. I wonder why. Okay, so there's probably like a 7-second delay between me saying this and you guys in the chat, but are we sounding any better? Because if not, I will turn off NVIDIA Broadcast. Oh, okay. It must have just been something going funky with. It's powered by the graphics card, which is really cool. Shout out to NVIDIA for that. If it happens again, let me know. And hey to Barbara. Hey to Jameer. Hey to Pam. And let's jump right into this. I'm going to go back to the filing. And we're going to make it giant so you guys can read it. And let me know, did you guys hear this news that he filed a response? Because I thought it was interesting. AV to the Seventh Power did coverage of Diddy's response to, I think her name was Joy, one of the accusers that filed the suit after Cassie, but before all this big raid news happened. But it's the first time we have a filing response from Diddy. And I didn't really hear much news about it, but she did a reading yesterday on her channel. You guys go check that out too. But I always think it's really interesting when the response is just kind of a little bit under the radar compared to the initial noise. So let me make this screen big though, and we will get into it. Zoom on in. You can see the big watermarks. So shout out to Deadline because they're the only ones that weren't just telling us what it said. They actually provided it. And then here we are doing a defamation per se, because what that means, guys, is just on its face. When you're accusing someone of something like SA, it's already held to a certain standard that will hurt your reputation. So defamation per se under California common law. And you can see here over on the left, he is going after Warner Brothers, Discovery, Maxine Productions, Sony Pictures, Mary Robertson and Emma Schwartz, and then does 1 through 50 inclusive. We're going to probably see more about that as we go on. That will probably cover other persons that may be identified during discovery. So plaintiff Dan Schneider, they're going to just say Schneider or Dan or plaintiff. They're giving us 3 names as we go on. As and for his complaint herein against defendants Warner Brothers Discovery, all of those names we just read, alleges as follows. This action arises out of the recent television docuseries Quiet on the Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV. They're going to just shorten that to Quiet on the Set, in which defendants falsely state or imply that Schneider, a well-known television producer, creator, and or writer, responsible for some of history's most beloved television shows, sexually abused children who worked on his television shows. These statements are fabrications. Now, the limited amount of stuff that I've heard about this documentary and the allegations surrounding him, it's my understanding that the accusations were broader than just SA, and that it also involved discrimination or a hostile work environment. So here we have a strong denial of these SA claims. Let's see if this is expanded on. Schneider is best known for creating, writing, and or producing Nickelodeon children's television comedies All That, The Amanda Show, Drake and Josh, Zoe 101, iCarly, Victorious, among others. These shows are hits, beloved by children and their families when they first ran, and enjoyed by new generations of children and their families today. The shows launched the careers of numerous young actors and burgeoning writers who, to this day, attribute much of their success to Schneider. Quiet on the Set's portrayal of Schneider is a hit job. While it is indisputable that 2 bona fide child sexual abusers worked on Nickelodeon shows, it is likewise indisputable that Schneider had no knowledge of their abuse, was not complicit in the abuse, condemned the abuse once it was discovered, waiting for the receipts on that, that will be interesting, and critically, was not a child sexual abuser himself. But for the sake of clickbait, ratings, and reviews, or put differently, sorry, let me pull this off the screen, sorry. But for the sake of clickbait, ratings, and views, or put differently, money, defendants have destroyed Schneider's reputation and legacy through the false statements and implications that Schneider is exactly that. They came out the gates with this intro here. They are saying, no, no, no. No doubt defendants will endeavor to obfuscate what this lawsuit is about by pointing to what they did get right. And Schneider will be the first to admit that some of what they said is true. At times, he was blind to the pain that some of his behaviors caused by certain colleagues, subordinates, and cast members. He will regret and atone for this behavior for the rest of his life. But one thing he is not, and the one thing that will forever mar his reputation and career both past and present, is a child sexual abuser. And again, that is like why this would be defamation per se. And he did do an apology video not too long ago, right? Was it maybe the beginning of this month? The beginning of April? He did an apology video, I believe. I didn't watch it, but I had seen it pop up. So this section, they're just going to say this is why we want this case to go forward in California. We know the studios are here. They're probably residents. The companies are here. So jurisdiction would be proper. And that the amount that they're looking for, and again, this is the confusing part, guys. He's not looking for just $35,000, but he's saying that the amount he would be looking for would exceed the jurisdictional sum of $35,000, meaning it would be appropriate to go to this court rather than a smaller claims court. They're going to go through the relevant principles here, and here I think it's actually important to read the state code because there are differences between different jurisdictions. So under California law, defamation is actionable as a claim for libel or slander. Quote, libel is a false and unprivileged publication by writing, printing, picture, effigy, or other fixed representation to the eye, which exposes any person to hatred, contempt, ridicule, or obloquy, or which causes him to be shunned or avoided, or which has a tendency to injure him in his occupation. Slander is a false and unprivileged publication, orally uttered, which charges any person with a crime or with having been indicted, convicted, or punished for a crime, or tends to injure him with respect to his office, profession, trade, or business. So, guys, if someone's accusing you of SA, that falls under this, this idea. that someone is something that would be criminal. California law recognizes that a defamatory statement can be either expressly stated or implied. If the defendant juxtaposes a series of facts so as to imply a defamatory connection between them, or otherwise creates a defamatory implication, he may be held responsible for the defamatory implication, even if the particular facts are correct. A photograph itself can convey both an implicit and an explicit message. So we're jumping to photographs, guys. The headline, caption, and photograph taken together are also a statement. A picture is worth 1,000 words. A photograph, especially when coupled with text, can convey a powerful message, in this case, a potentially defamatory one. So this is cited from the Manzari case, and where this was that finding that when the headline is, quote, "Porn industry shuts down after female performer tests positive for HIV," followed by a few sentences before showing a picture of the plaintiff, the juxtaposition constitutes defamation by implication that the plaintiff was the adult performer who contracted HIV. So, you ever see when they use like a stock image photo at the top of a news story? And it's just something that's supposed to illustrate the headline, but that's not really the person the headline's talking about. Well, they did that for this person and put it right next to a headline about someone testing positive for a disease. A highly stigmatized disease. So, and they put in parentheticals here that editing of a documentary to create a false and defamatory impression can constitute defamation. That's interesting. A defamation claim is properly stated when words, juxtaposed with a picture, may be interpreted by an average or ordinary viewer as defamatory. Given the headline and picture, an average or ordinary person could conclude that based on the implication, that the plaintiff was the individual who contracted HIV. In other words, the woman that was in the picture of the article next to the headline, it would be reasonable for a reader to make the inference. The issue is whether the gist or sting of the statements and graphics together imply a defamatory meaning to the average person. Now, this is about a picture next to a headline. What is a documentary film? That's many, many frames, many, many pictures, all strung together with a narrative and, sometimes titles and text are on the screen. And there's a title of the whole documentary. There's a synopsis. It's a lot of words and a lot of pictures. So is it exactly the same as a picture next to a headline? Can it be the same? Is it entirely different? Interesting legal question, and it seems like they're going to rely on case law that involves a single picture and a headline. The fact that an implied defamatory charge or insinuation leaves room for an innocent interpretation does not mean it is not defamatory. There may be conflicting inferences, but the question is whether, quote, when it is addressed to the public at large, it is reasonable to assume that at least some of the readers or viewers will take it in a defamatory sense. In parentheticals, they say, publication judged not so much by its effect when subjected to the critical analysis of a mind trained in the law, but when the natural and probable effect upon the mind of the reader. So, what is reasonable to a reasonable person looking at it? Not the intent of the person who may have intentionally or inadvertently put a picture and a headline together. Doesn't matter what the intent was. It's the possible reasonable perception that matters. If statement or implication is susceptible to both an innocent and defamatory meaning to an average person, defamation claim sustained. Here, and as detailed below, the voiceovers and graphics in Quiet on the Set and its trailer, juxtaposed or edited with the visual depictions, are purposefully and intentionally defamatory, in that they falsely and repeatedly state or imply that Schneider is a child sexual abuser and committed crimes in this regard, and have been interpreted as such by countless average, ordinary, or reasonable viewers. And that's what I want to emphasize. This interpretation. What I know about all of this is coming through the interpretation of countless average, ordinary, or reasonable viewers. That's where I'm getting my knowledge, my awareness, secondhand, from exactly this. So there's clearly been a reach. But is it defamatory? So facts common to all claims. They're going to talk about the trailer. The trailer was widely disseminated, clearly concerned Schneider, and falsely stated and implied that Schneider is a criminal and child sexual abuser. Defendants variously wrote, filmed, produced, marketed, broadcast, and streamed a trailer promoting Quiet on the Set, which can be found on ID's identity. Oh, so that was what is it? Identity discovery. So is that public? We should do a watch party, guys. They'll probably strike me, but whatever. So it's up there. They put the link here. I can't highlight and clip it for you guys, but it's on the ID's YouTube channel, and which was released online in or about February of 2024. The trailer is defamatory in that it was intended to and did falsely state or imply that Schneider is a child sexual abuser and committed crimes in this regard. In the first 38 seconds of the 2-minute and 30-second trailer, defendants set the stage for the defamatory statements and insinuations of Schneider's purported child sexual abuse, by hammering the connection between Schneider and the child audience and cast members. In the first 5 seconds, the trailer describes Nickelodeon as kid everything, before showing video clips of child audience and cast members. The trailer then swiftly juxtaposes the children with its target, Schneider, and his work with child actors on the Nickelodeon shows, with the voiceover stating, "And this is when Dan Schneider arrives, Nickelodeon's golden boy. He created these shows that were hugely successful for them." The trailer cuts to the video of Schneider being interviewed, explaining, "No one had really ever done sketch comedy by kids for kids." The voiceover continues to emphasize Schneider's connection to children, flashing pictures of Schneider with a number of well-known child actors, while stating, "He launched the careers of child actors who became major stars. For 20 years, he shaped children's entertainment and culture." The trailer continues, showing additional videos of Schneider looking directly into the camera. At the 39th second, the trailer takes an abrupt turn. "That marked one of the darkest chapters," the voiceover states, while cutting to the following graphic of the ID logo and the all caps words, "True Crime Event." The true crime graphic. So, very interesting. They are screenshotting a frame. They are taking a frame, treating it like a photo, and saying they juxtaposed it with Dan Schneider and saying, "But that marked one of the darkest chapters," and then label what they're about to talk about as a true crime event. Do you guys think that a frame is comparable to case law involving the juxtaposition of a photograph and a headline? What do you think? The implication between the 38-second connection linking Schneider and his work with children on the one hand, followed by the words "true crime event" on the other, could not be more clear. Schneider committed a crime, a true crime, and one involving children. This is false. The ID logo only emphasizes this false and defamatory implication. ID is a network dedicated to true crime documentaries. That the trailer is stating or implying that the true crime involves Schneider is also clear. In the 42 seconds leading up to the true crime graphic, Schneider is not only the main focus, he is the sole focus. Now, what's the problem with targeting true crime? And this is an opinion, but what's the problem with targeting true crime as being an assertion of crime? You know, a lot of the true crime content that I'm familiar with is, investigation in nature. It's asking questions. It's mysterious. It's like, but nobody actually knows. So there's an undertone of the true crime genre where things are not solved, there's no convictions, things aren't proven. It's just the investigative stage. So I don't know. I'm not saying it's a bad argument to make, because why not make an argument? But I think we can predict what the response on this argument would be. That true crime doesn't mean proven beyond reasonable doubt in a court of law. It's a genre, and it can encompass things that are not actual defamatory claims. Because what would be the flip side? If the whole true crime genre is defamatory, it kind of wouldn't exist anymore. Every true crime thing would be sued all the time unless there was a conviction to tie to it. So that's an interesting argument, I think. I would love to see the response. So the trailer then doubles down on the implication that Schneider is not only a criminal in some way connected to children, but an abuser, or more specifically, a child sexual abuser. Immediately after the true crime graphic, the trailer cuts to a photograph of Schneider as the voiceover states, quote, "Working for Dan was like being in an abusive relationship." The word like is there. Dan's treatment of people on his shows was an open secret. That is an implication that the treatment was happening and people knew it. The phrase, an open secret, is a loaded one, not coincidentally. An Open Secret is a 2014 documentary film that exposed child sexual abuse in the film industry in California. The film had nothing to do with Schneider and does not mention him in any way whatsoever. Do you guys think that that quote... Hold on, I'm going to pause here. Do you guys think that that quote, "Working for Dan was like being in an abusive relationship. Dan's treatment of people on his shows was an open secret." Do you think that that quote is a non-coincidental reference to this 2014 documentary? I don't think there's, unless they give us more, I don't think there's a reason to conclude that. Just saying. I think they're over-characterizing that or taking creative licensing there, unless they have something else. Within seconds, the trailer depicts a video of Schneider working on one of the Nickelodeon children's shows while posing the question. So they're showing this frame and they're asking, how safe can any kids be in that environment? The parentheticals false. Implication is clear. Schneider sexually abused children actors in his shows. Now, I'm not disputing that the implication could be there, or someone could look at this opening of the trailer and reasonably perceive that that is the implication. I don't think they needed to characterize that other quote about open secrets to get there, to make that argument. But whatever. The foregoing image and voiceover, ending at the 66th second of the trailer, is immediately followed at the 70th second by an image of a child's shadow with the voiceover stating, "There would be even bigger problems down the line with actual pedophiles on set." 70 seconds in, Schneider remains not only the main focus of the trailer, but the sole focus. I don't know. Let's read those two back to back. So they're saying between these two frames, they say, how safe can any kids be in that environment? They're showing this frame. And then this image and voiceover ends at the 66th second. And then at second 70, there's an image of a child's shadow with a voiceover. And he's not currently on screen anymore. Dan Schneider's not on screen at this point. He's just been the main focus up to this point. Then they say, there would be even bigger problems down the line with actual pedophiles on set. If you've been talking about somebody for 66 seconds, then they get off the screen, and then the statement says, there would be even bigger problems down the line with actual pedophiles. Is that not a contrast? Actual versus who you were just talking about? I think this is an overreaching argument here a little bit. 70 seconds in, Schneider remains not only the main focus of the trailer, but the sole focus. The ordinary viewer will interpret the voiceover to mean exactly what defendants intended. Schneider is a pedophile who sexually abused children on his shows. And I want to be clear. I'm not saying someone didn't watch this documentary and maybe get that idea, walk away with that idea, because that seems to be the consensus I'm gathering from seeing people's responses to the documentary. And their opinions kind of before the documentary too. That's another issue. But I really don't see the need. I think that they could say that this documentary, its presentation as a whole, is defamatory, even without trying to put this specific quote to the test, because to me this quote kind of contrasts Dan Schneider versus actual pedophiles. But so I wouldn't want to highlight that if I was on the side writing this. I'd want to highlight it as the opposite side. What do you think? 100 seconds into the trailer, Schneider remains the only person mentioned by name, 3 times to be exact, with variations of his likeness portrayed 10 times. The trailer then verbally describes a litany of horrific sexual crimes against children. They find this enormous trove of child pornography. 2. The officer said they found Ziploc bags, each one with the girl's name on it, and 3, 11 charges of child sexual abuse related to a child actor. Simultaneously, images of legal documents describe a police department's sexually exploited child unit and the words, "He was going to explode if he couldn't get hold of a little ... how he could find one to, or if I have to." Wow. Kept in plastic baggies containing girls' panties. The unstated question posed to the audience is who committed these crimes. With only Schneider's name and likeness offered, the implication is clear. It was Schneider. Again, this is false. This, to me, is a way better argument than picking at the quote that we just read earlier. If this is how it was laid out, I would see why a reasonable reader, and we've already looked at the case law they're going to cite, that just juxtaposing a picture next to a headline, even without explicitly saying who the person in the picture was, or without the headline saying, hey, this picture matches who we're talking about, the reasonable interpretation was all that was needed for the court to find it defamatory. And I think that this paragraph here is a stronger argument that could be backed up by that precedent. Not the other stuff so far, though. Schneider anticipates that defendants will attempt to defend themselves against the foregoing by pointing to the image of a legal document with highlighted text that appears for literally 1 second with zero context or explanation. Quote, Peck was coaching the victim. And almost 2 minutes into the 2-minute and 30-second trailer, quote, Peck is the first person to be named other than Schneider. His full name is not stated or shown, nor is his image shown. There's no reason for an average or ordinary viewer to notice it, let alone draw the conclusion that it was Peck and not Schneider who committed crimes against a child. And by this point, the damage defendants intended was already done. When the trailer closes with a former child actor victim being asked if he had ever told his story publicly before, the implication remains that it was Schneider who perpetrated the crime, another fabrication. Now, we're going to talk about Quiet on the Set, because we were just talking about the trailer with all of that. I do want to pop over here. Let's see what you guys are saying. We'll jump back into that. So, Pam, I think you're saying you heard about the Diddy response earlier today. It was, it was just like, why are you suing my companies if my companies weren't in existence when you're alleging that this stuff happened? But, AV pointed out it's interesting that this is the one thing that he's responded to. We don't have responses from him on the other stuff, at least not publicly. But he responded to that one. So why is that? And then, yeah, so Jameer, that's what I thought. There was, discrimination and hostile work environment were used against him. And still, you wrote that like 20 minutes ago, this comment, but we're about 9 pages in, and it's really focused on the allegations of, child SA. He's not addressing these claims of discrimination or hostile work environment as defamatory, at least not yet in this complaint. And then, yeah, so Pam, I'm blind with this for the same thing. And then Jameer saying, never heard anyone say that he essayed them, only that he employed them. And I want to say that from what I've taken in from Twitter, and again, that's like through the grapevine, right? It's a telephone game. But my impression from what I was reading from others and just seeing on impression without looking into it was that he had himself abused kids in some way beyond just being a bad boss. That's really just like a top level. I didn't look into it at all. It was my absorbing what I saw while scrolling without clicking to look at it further. So. And then also that he had weird fetishes he broadcasted even if he got massages. And that goes to like, when you hear like weird things about somebody, it's a little bit easier to assume something else about them that's also weird is also true. Even if like the weird thing is just kind of weird but not criminal on the surface. When you keep saying someone's weird in way 1, way 2, way 3, it starts to stack up and kind of build a foundation for you to say something else and it just be believed. Seems reasonable. He seems like that type of way of thinking. And then that guy McFly says, person is considered innocent until proven guilty. If his guilty is implied in any way, then that's defamatory. Yeah, because this is a huge claim, right? Because he's not going after, maybe it's later in the complaint, but we've gone through the intro and they're only tackling the child essay. They're not saying the hostile work environment was defamatory. They're only going after the thing that would be a implication of a crime, a very immoral act, and they're saying that's not true, that's defamatory. So pretty interesting so far looking at this legal argument, even though I'm annoyed. I think there's 2 times now where I've said, like, why are they focusing on that? Because it doesn't really look the way they're taking creative licensing with it to look. And that's interesting. So that guy McFly, you think that to call it an open secret is definitely implying guilt as if it was a known fact. I agree. Do you think it was a reference to the specific documentary, though? Because I've never heard of that documentary, but I know the phrase, like, calling something an open secret. Everybody knows about it, but nobody says anything. So the statement, I think, was defamatory, but I think it was weird for them to go the extra mile in their argument and say, oh, it's no coincidence. There was a 2014 case called an open secret. I'm not sure, unless they have something else to base that. I'm not sure that that's true. And I'm not sure it's necessary to make as an argument to take it the extra mile. Leave it at calling it an open secret being an implication in and of itself. And then Barbara says, can everyone confirm for me that this was supposed to happen in the... Yes, Barbara, you're not crazy. I scheduled it, and I was waiting to see if my internet gave me a warning that something was wrong with it. Because I haven't had a tech come out. Suddenly, my upspeed is back over 20 megabits per second, and not below 1 megabits per second, which it was under for a week. No tech came out. It just fixed itself, I guess. But since it was fine, we're rolling through it. But you are not crazy. And so I didn't know. So this is new information for me. So Barbara's adding the context that there's a reason why Amanda Bynes didn't partake in this documentary, he groomed her. So I didn't know that she was or was not. I guess I would have assumed that she would have been. But now I know she's not. Kind of makes some sense. There's a lot to deal with being questioned by Warner Brothers, right? This was a big production. This wasn't just like a little teeny documentary, I don't think. And then the quote is something specific they can point to and build the rest of the lawsuit around. Yeah. And yeah, interpreting producer's intent. So that's a good point there too. So we're on this argument now where they're going to talk about Quiet on the Set rather than just the trailer. And it's kind of the same thing. Quiet on the Set was widely disseminated, clearly concerned Schneider, and falsely stated and implied that Schneider is a criminal and child sexual abuser. Episode 1 falsely and intentionally states and or implies that Schneider essayed children who worked on his shows. Quiet on the Set was simultaneously released on Max and Discovery Plus, with the first 4 episodes airing between March 17th and 18th, 2024, with the 5th episode airing on April 7th, 2024. Quiet on the Set picks up where the trailer left off by falsely stating and or implying that Schneider essayed children who worked on his shows. Toward that end, the episode 1 opening graphic provides, the series investigates the abuse experienced by children from the adults they were expected to trust. And they screenshot, there's like Deadline's watermark all over it, but they screenshot this image, this frame from the documentary that says, this series investigates the abuse experienced by children from the adults they were expected to trust. Viewer discretion is advised. Episode 1 is 42 minutes. Did I miss a footnote? Ooh, did I miss a footnote? Where's this footnote coming from? Wow, they put a footnote in the title here. All right, so there's a footnote from up here, and it says, numerous statements and implications in Quiet on the Set are false, and the fact that this complaint does not address each and every misstatement should not be deemed as acceptance of the truth of any statement. So that goes to what I was saying about, well, what about the hostile work environment? This complaint and this action focus on the most egregious defamatory statements that have caused the most severe harm and damage. All right, so everything I talked about earlier about that hostile work environment is solved by this footnote. Episode 1 is 42 minutes and 43 seconds long. The first minute or so introduces the setting, Nickelodeon's children TV shows. Then the subject, Schneider. Less than 2 minutes into episode 1, Quiet on the Set depicts a video clip of Schneider receiving, quote, the first ever Nickelodeon Lifetime Achievement Award, as multiple people yell Dan Schneider. Episode 1 then shows myriad images of Schneider in rapid succession, calling him a golden boy, a cash cow, a person who launched the careers of child actors who became major stars and who shaped children's entertainment and shaped children's culture. That success is immediately juxtaposed with Schneider's downfall, while the speaker warns the viewer, literally using the word warn, that if you were a child of the 90s, this is going to ruin that for you. That's pretty heavy. A tweet is shown accusing Schneider. It's an X post. An X post is shown accusing Schneider of inappropriate behavior. And mere seconds thereafter, two side-by-side images are shown depicting Schneider with his arm around a child actress and his hand on the back of that same child actress. So, as they're showing this picture on the screen, they're saying, if you were a child of the 90s, this is going to ruin that for you. And they're showing this picture. So, I would say, yeah, as a reasonable person, if you ask me, I'm supposed to think something nefarious, like Jeffrey Epstein, Lolita Express is going on here. To aid the viewer's understanding, or more accurately, misunderstanding, of Schneider as a children's predator, Episode 1 turns to the purported perversion of the television content he created or wrote. We have a footnote here. While defendants take certain scenes out of context from hundreds of hours of television in an attempt to support their defamation of Schneider, the television scenes referenced were not intended to be inappropriate in any way. It is telling that these clips remain on television today. Further, at least some of several child actors' references to feeling unsafe relate to some of the jokes or stunts performed on the shows, and not child sexual abuse. Defendants intentionally and purposefully take these statements out of context and combine them with a reference to falsely state or imply that Schneider sexually abused children, and that is why they felt unsafe. I wonder if we're going to get any quotes from the people these quotes are from. Back up here where we left off with the footnote, Schneider, quote, made children, quote, do things that were very weird. There were always setups that reference porn. These statements color the inference set up by the trailer and are underscored by Episode 1's first 3 minutes and its conclusion discussed below. Schneider was a child essay. Again, this is false. Now, we've already, and this is not to put anybody on blast, it's to say that this is how things translate. And this is not me saying that the underlying implication is true or false, or based in fact or not based in fact. But we have in the chat here, yeah, he was into some weird things. So, is it reasonable to say, that this documentary was doing something that could make reasonable viewers believe, hey, something weird about Dan Schneider? I think that's fair to say yes. Whether you think it's actually unfounded in reality or founded in reality is a separate question. But I would say inherently, if we're taking this paragraph at face value, if these quotes are associated with him, he made children do things that are very weird. They're showing this picture. What would a reasonable person infer? Episode 1 is effectively sandwiched by this theme, closing with the same messaging in which it began. After a lengthy section on adult women's experience with Schneider in the workplace, a voiceover questions, quote, how safe can any kids be in that environment if that's how the adult women are being treated behind the scenes? But there would be even bigger problems down the line with actual pedophiles on set. Now again, I'm going to call out that word actual. I have the wrong screen on. We're going to call the word actual is a contrast, right? If I'm like, oh, I don't want to watch cat streams anymore. I want to go watch an actual blonde. It's because I'm not actually blonde. Like, naturally blonde, right? Actual implies contrast. The audio then transitions to a reporter stating, Van Nuys Division officers have arrested a suspected child predator charged with kissing and touching a 9-year-old girl, but officers believe there may be more victims. The background does not show the predator's likeness, nor give the predator's name. 2 easy fixes to avoid viewer confusion. Yeah, so if I take this filing at case value, and so far, the bulk of their conversation, besides a slight mention of Peck earlier in the trailer, I don't even know if that's coming into play in episode 1 here, because we're talking about episode 1. I can see why a reasonable viewer would believe that this news story and the narration, the way it's being delivered in this documentary, a reasonable viewer could very likely believe this implication related to Dan Schneider. The background does not show the predator's likeness nor give the predator's name, two easy fixes to avoid viewer confusion. Instead, episode 1 shows a television screen with black and white static. Oh, so they chose to show, like, oh my god. That's, okay, that was actually, I think that was good delivery here. Hey, there's two things you could have done. But instead of, you have too much going on the screen, you had, like, other information, or you're showing a picture of the police report and you wanted to get all that in, you chose for effect to just have a black and white TV static effect playing at this moment in time. Editorially, you had the room to put something that, actually showed the likeness of the person that's being discussed here. And you just chose to put up a cool feature, a cool effect. It's pretty good delivery, I think, in the argument there. The way they did the parenthetical and then said instead. So, like the trailer, the conclusion of episode 1 wholly obfuscates the reality by focusing on Schneider, and only Schneider, while providing the viewer with no information to conclude that the predator was anyone other than Schneider. As a whole, the episode 1 inference from the opening graphic, taken together with this verbal warning, written accusation of inappropriate behavior, images of Schneider posing with his arms around a young female actress, discussion of inappropriate, pornographic, sexual content on the Nickelodeon shows, questioning of child safety, and an arrest of a child predator is clear. Children were essayed on Nickelodeon television shows, and the perpetrator was Schneider. This is false. Guys, I'm just gonna say, I had that impression that he, really creeped up on somebody. And I'm not saying that's not true or false, but I didn't think that implication was debatable. I thought it was kind of like a bold implication. And now I'm seeing it was kind of a behind the veils interpretation, open for interpretation type thing. I thought it wasn't an outright accusation the way people were running with it, which means they interpreted it that way after watching this. Although one could argue it wasn't this documentary that made people think that. It could have been something else that made people think that, by and large. But would this be a new audience? Discovery Plus and Max, and wherever any clips reached. I think they said something about the ID YouTube channel had the trailer. Those all have their own unique audiences, which could be new audiences that didn't already have this inference about Dan Schneider in mind. So now we're going to talk about episode 2, which is surprisingly, I thought Brian Peck would be mentioned through all of this, because I heard a lot about him too, but I guess episode 2 must be where he comes into the picture, besides that little blip in the trailer. So episode 2 states and or implies that, like convicted felons Jason Handy and Brian Peck, Schneider too was a child sexual abuser. The trailer in episode 1's conflation of Schneider on the one hand with the real child sexual abusers on the other hand continues with episode 2, which finally introduces convicted felons. They say finally. I love, little words are important here. Which finally introduces convicted felons and child sexual abusers Jason Handy and Brian Peck. These are awful last names, man. For them to be associated with this type of crime, Handy and Peck. Let me keep going. Episode 2 begins by introducing Handy, who was ultimately... Did I miss a footnote? No, it's further. Episode 2 begins by introducing Handy, who was ultimately convicted of various felony crimes against children for conduct committed while he was employed on certain Nickelodeon shows. Quiet on Set, this is the footnote here, fails to note that Handy worked solely on television shows produced for Nickelodeon by Talon Robbins Productions, including Cousin Skeeter, which Schneider had nothing to do with, and not by Schneider's production company, Schneider's Bakery. Episode 2 pivots stories and then returns to Handy in the latter half of the episode. There, shortly following a graphic description of Handy's misconduct, a victim's mother states, quote, "He had also told this young girl, 'I can get you on other shows.'" In the background, the image of a legal document shows the following text. So while that's being said, this text is on the screen. Quote, "Talk to her about getting her a job on another children's program." These statements are remarkably similar to another speaker's commentary about Schneider in episode 1, where Schneider's ability to make or break a career is emphasized. Quote, "On the Amanda Show, Dan is the kingmaker. He is the one who is deciding who gets a spinoff, who gets the most lines. Then, without explaining who the speaker's reference to, quote, he was, episode 2 immediately and inexplicably cuts to an image that centers on Schneider, not Handy. Oh wait, is Handy in this picture? I don't know what he looks like. But you can see the subtitle. That is when they're saying it in the moment. And you see the subtitle in the bottom. I can get you on other shows. So Dan is here. I'm not going to say that he's centered, but maybe they pan on him. Maybe they chose this frame because of the subtitle being present. But I don't know. Handy could be in this picture. I'm not sure. And 3 rows of people. Schneider sits in the middle, the viewer's attention directed to him by virtue of his position in the image, and the gaze of a child actress turned toward and looking up at him. In the top row, with his head partially obstructed, is the real child abuser, Handy. Okay, so top row, head partially obstructed. I mean, this guy in the center could be partially obstructed. Maybe you guys know in the chat if this guy in the middle is Handy. I think this is another interesting moment where they're concluding that this picture is centered on Dan Schneider here because of the rule of thirds or whatever, and because Amanda Bynes is looking over his way. And that it can't be about Handy because Handy's head is partially cut out. You could say maybe that was the intent, but I don't think it's a clear conclusion by any means. Moving on, though. So, by virtue of episode 2's manipulative mix of editing, speech, and imagery, the viewer is left to conclude that, like Handy, Schneider used his position to facilitate child sexual abuse. This is false. Episode 2 continues its manipulative use of editing and photographs to conflate Schneider with a second child abuser, Peck. Episode 2 exaggerates, and he's in this picture too, though, isn't he? I don't know, I gotta get better at recognizing faces. But the other thing is, my argument would be, why don't they use a picture just of Handy? That would be my argument. You've used pictures of just Schneider already, or images that showed the likeness of Schneider alone. Why not use a sole image, a standalone image, where Schneider is not also in the picture at least? It could be a crowd picture of Handy, but maybe Schneider's not in it at all. I think there's ways that this could be very clear, and since there is case law that found it defamatory to put a picture of a woman next to a picture of a headline about a disease, when that woman was not the person with the disease, there could be an interesting, a judge could want to hear this part right here. So, episode 2 continues its manipulative use of editing and photographs to conflate Schneider with a second child abuser, Peck. Episode 2 exaggerates the relationship between Schneider and Peck, falsely claiming that the latter worked closely with Dan as this dialogue coach, and that he's very much one of the cogs in the Dan Schneider machine. So this footnote here says Schneider had no knowledge of Peck's abuse of Drake Bell until that information came to light along after Bell's appearances on The Amanda Show, another Todd Robbins production for which Schneider was a showrunner, and filming of the pilot for Drake and Josh. Echoing the precise format used to introduce the above misleading image, episode 2 describes Peck's abhorrent abuse and former child actor muses. Quote, "We go through enough as child actors, and for us to not feel like we have a voice, that's worse. Because you don't know who you're supposed to trust, that's worse." As with Handy, episode 2 then immediately and inexplicably cuts to a photograph featuring Schneider, not Peck. Okay, that's bad. If they're talking about Peck, why are they showing this picture? Unless it's supposed to be an implication. We go through enough as child actors, and for us to not feel like we have a voice, that's worse. And then you show you show Schneider. So what's the implication of this quote? If you put this picture up. Only after that image remains on screen for 3 seconds does episode 2 pivot to Peck. Schneider was not complicit in Peck's crimes, was unaware of Peck's crimes until that information was made a matter of public record, and Schneider did not commit any such crimes himself. The only reason to include Schneider's image in this context was to falsely equate Schneider with Peck. The viewer is left to infer that just as Peck was a child sexual abuser, so was Schneider. Can you imagine this is just like a new editor's job? He was just like using pictures that he could find, or she, And now this whole case is like hinging on the editorial choices. I think that's unlikely though, because they have huge teams of people working on these productions, but whatever. And then episode 5. So we're going to episode 5 after talking about episode 2. Episode 5 falsely states and/or implies that Schneider is a convicted child molester and/or allowed them on set. In the final minutes of episode 5, the speakers discuss updating child actor laws, quote, so that no individual who is a convicted child molester can ever be on a Hollywood set again. Then, after describing the loopholes that allow a convicted child molester, that they're quoting this here, to be on a Hollywood set, episode 5 cuts to a photograph of Schneider. We're going to play a guessing game next time there's going to be a picture. We're going to ask who's in it. So this picture, Schneider on a Hollywood set, which remains on screen for 5 seconds. With the subtitle, inevitably, it's ripe for toxicity. And you can turn these subtitles on and off, these closed captions. But these attorneys left them on for their screenshots. That's you know, I think that's good lawyering. It's good for their argument. The use of Schneider's photograph in this context clearly states and/or implies that Schneider is a convicted child molester, which is both false and made with reckless disregard for the truth. Other options for photographs are obvious. Handy or Peck, for example. The use of Schneider's photograph in this context is also defamatory because it states and/or implies that Schneider invited or allowed convicted child molesters on the set, in effect, aiding and abetting their crimes. This too, and this is kind of a catch-all, right? Because they're saying here on one hand, it implies that he is the child molester. But then they're saying it's also defamatory even if that isn't the implication, because it's still implying or stating that Schneider invited it onto the set. So this is we're seeing a little bit more expansive of an argument here. This too is both false and made with reckless disregard of the truth. As defendants are aware, neither Handy nor Peck were convicted child molesters when they worked on any show with which Schneider was affiliated. Indeed, it was not Nickelodeon, but a different network entirely that hired Peck after his conviction. As defendants are aware, Schneider did not personally hire Handy or Peck. They were hired through Tal and Robbins Productions, not Schneider's own production company. Defendants knew their statements and implications were false. So now we're getting to, we're talking about it wasn't true and how it was being disseminated, what the audience was. And now we're getting to, they knew. They knew what they were saying or what they were implying was false. Because an element of defamation is falsity, and because defendants will likely argue that Schneider is a public figure, that means higher burden, Schneider must plead what he, and more importantly, defendants know to be true. The trailer and quiet on set statements and/or implications are false. Schneider never committed, nor has he ever been charged or convicted with committing, a criminal act towards a child. Schneider never sexually abused a child, nor has he been charged or convicted with sexually abusing a child. The trailer and quiet on set statements and implications to the contrary are both false and made with reckless and malicious disregard for the truth. As argued above, defendants' motivation in publishing the false statements and implications were for clickbait, ratings, and views, or simply put, money. Defendants purposefully stated or implied that Schneider sexually abused children on his shows in order to generate interest, and it worked as intended. Defendant Robertson spoke to this motivation in recent interviews. In an interview with the LA Times on April 5th, 2024, Robertson stated, "When we released the trailer for Quiet on the Set, it went viral almost immediately and questions started swirling." So you can't remember how I said earlier, maybe people went into this documentary already feeling this way, and it's not this documentary that, put forth a reputational damage. But then you have Robertson coming on and saying, oh, this new place that's publishing the trailer went viral almost immediately. Questions started swirling. Questions imply what? People are considering the possibility for the first time. They're not already sure about it. That means, by Robertson's own words, this trailer had an immediate and widespread impact. The trailer itself ignited a fair amount of conversation. And in another interview with Gold Derby on April 11th, 2024, Robertson stated, "We saw that even after just the release of the trailer alone, there were swirling questions. A debate had been ignited around some of the particulars of the series, the original 4 episodes." And then they're linking to this here. Again, I can't copy and paste that, but they said it was from Gold Derby, April 11th. Indeed, at the very end of episode 4, defendants admit the falsity of the above described defamatory statements and implications. The voiceover, with approximately 10 minutes left in the fourth and final episode of the original series, states that back in 2018, when Schneider and Nickelodeon parted ways, Nickelodeon, or its then parent, Viacom CBS, conducted an extensive investigation of Schneider by interviewing dozens of present and former employees, with no child sexual abuse found. The voiceover states, we're talking about episode 4, this investigation did not find any evidence of inappropriate sexual behavior or inappropriate relationships with children. Oh wait, no, we're talking about... What interview is this? Yeah, so episode 4. Oh, it's to show knowledge. Ooh, this attorney is slick doing this. They're using their own documentary against them. So, footnote here. It should be noted that this singular statement, following the trailer and 3.5 episodes of a 4-episode series, is far too little. This is a great footnote. This was needed. And too late for the preceding trailer and episodes of Quiet on the Set to not be defamatory to the ordinary or average viewer. For example, quote, false insinuations are not cured or negated by explanatory language later in the magazine because, quote, a reasonable juror could conclude that the explanatory language was far too removed from the cover headline to have the salutary effect. And this is that same Manzari case. Quote, a passing reference buried in the article is insufficient to defeat a defamation claim. Moreover, many viewers may watch only the trailer, or some, but not all episodes of Quiet on the Set, rendering episode 4 a classic example of too little too late. Now this is why we have these quotes. Maybe there's quotes in other interviews, but what quotes did this complaint focus on? When we released the trailer, it went viral almost immediately and questions started swirling. So these attorneys very strategically showed how big of a shebang the initial trailer was. Why? Because they already know that the case law they want to cite says, well, a reference later on isn't a cure-all. It doesn't cure and defeat a defamation claim. It's considered too little too late. Now, if we go back up to where we left off, as further evidence of actual malice and knowing or reckless disregard for the truth, defendants are also well aware of an investigative report of Schneider conducted by the New York Times in 2021. The Times investigation culminated in an article dated June 30th, 2021, which reveals that the Times interviewed numerous former coworkers, friends, and television executives on Schneider shows at Nickelodeon, with no reported evidence of child sexual abuse or misconduct with respect to any of the children who worked with Schneider. The Times confirmed that Nickelodeon's investigation of Schneider also found no evidence of child sexual abuse whatsoever. Nevertheless, the trailer and Quiet on the Set, as set forth above, knowingly and intentionally go out of their way to state or implicate that Schneider essayed children on his shows, committed crimes, and is the same as or equivalent to convicted child molesters. Defendant could have made it clear. So this is where we're getting into malice, right? Reckless disregard up to malice. Defendant could have done all these things. He could have made it clear in the trailer or in the first episodes that Schneider 1 did not commit any sexual abuse of any child actors. 2, there is no evidence of such. 3, he was not charged with and did not commit any crimes. And or 4, that his acts or words are very different than those of the child molesters depicted in Quiet on the Set. There could have been a graphics or disclaimer to this effect at the very beginning of the trailer or Quiet on the Set. Simply stated, defendant could have been honest. Instead, defendants, the trailer, and Quiet on the Set do the exact opposite, and knowingly, intentionally, maliciously, and repeatedly state or imply that Schneider is a child sexual abuser, likely to attract viewers and ratings. In addition, defendants have acted with actual malice and purposeful disregard for the truth by refusing to interview witnesses or air witness testimony that does not fit their false and defamatory narrative. Because what? We just heard that there's these other interviews that exist where they interviewed a bunch of people, but those people weren't featured in this documentary. But they exist. They're known. They're documented somewhere else. And they weren't brought in for a fair and balanced presentation. So here they go on to say, for example, after a brief conversation, a former president of content, development, and production from Nickelodeon repeatedly offered to meet with one or more of defendants to speak openly, truthfully, and positively about Nickelodeon television shows and Schneider, and defendants thereafter completely ignored this individual. I'll wait to see a response from, from the defendants here on this one. Maybe there's a reason. Maybe they're like a crackpot or something. Similarly, others have stated that they were interviewed by one or more defendants and spoke positively about Schneider, and then were never contacted again or asked to be on camera. So, that's interesting. I always like to hear stories of people that have good things to say, and they're left out of something where there is no counterbalance given. Here, there seems to be more than just one example, which makes it less likely that, one example, maybe they're not credible, maybe they're a little, off their rocker, maybe they weren't available, or they pretended to be available, but they really weren't. But when you have multiple people, show them, especially if they're volunteering to come forward. Give that counterbalance. Why not? In addition, in recent weeks, accusations have mounted that one or more defendants were dishonest or deceptive during witness interviews as to the intended purpose of the questions. Accusations have mounted that one or more defendants were dishonest or deceptive during witness interviews. As to the intended purpose of the questions, with one witness stating that he felt ambushed. There have also been allegations that one or more defendants used certain intellectual property without permission. This further demonstrates a knowing and or reckless disregard for the truth. Interesting. Accusations have mounted. Are you guys aware of any of that? And it says that this one witness, he felt ambushed. I wonder if there's more out there on that I'm not aware of. Because I haven't seen that buzzing the same way I've heard about Schneider and Peck and the general aura of bad things happening on Nickelodeon sets. And then Schneider was harmed, right? Because that's another element. You've got to show that your reputation and career have been harmed by what this happened. So they're going to go into this. Schneider was immediately contacted by friends and colleagues in disbelief about the trailer's false depiction. Now this is a bit self-serving the way they're writing this. They're wording it in a way people knew, and they were questioning his reputation. But they're also wording it in a way that says they were in disbelief of the false depiction. So it's a self-serving implication that it's false. But fair enough, it's their complaint. While these persons know the truth, the overwhelming majority of the public does not. To them, Schneider is and will remain what defendants have portrayed him to be. The harm to Schneider's reputation, career, and business, to say nothing of his own overwhelming emotional distress, cannot be understated. As referenced above, in recent years, there have been rumors about Schneider and his shows, including that certain jokes, taken out of context from hundreds of hours of television, were intentionally inappropriate, which was not the case at all. Regardless, these rumors were primarily posted by anonymous users on fringe social media sites. Are we calling X a fringe social media site? That's funny. And do not come remotely close to the severe impact of the defamatory statements in Quiet on the Set and its trailer, which in stark contrast are made by the largest media companies in the world, via one of the world's largest platforms, namely Max. Guys, I really hope. They did reference a tweet earlier, and they said a tweet was shown on the screen. Are they trying to say that, all these other rumors earlier than this documentary don't come remotely close? I'm not discrediting the publication to a new audience by Quiet on the Set going to Max and Discovery and whatever. But this is a pretty sneaky argument to try to say that Twitter is a fringe social media site. There might be fringe clicks on there. But there's a lot of daily average users on Twitter. That was unnecessary, I think, to just blur that out as a fringe social media site when they're probably talking about places like Twitter. So, further, it is Quiet on the Set and its trailers that opportunistically seized upon and egregiously expanded or embellished these rumors by going so far as to falsely state or imply, as a matter of fact, that Schneider essayed children on his shows and committed crimes in this regard. Thus, defendants have caused Schneider to suffer the severe damages described herein. And they're going to say here that the average or ordinary viewer understands the trailer and quiet on the set to be defamatory. And I'm going to reiterate as an outsider, that was my impression, right, from what I heard other people saying about the trailer. They interpreted it that way, and I absorbed their interpretation. I didn't, like, double down on it. I just kind of figured, like, I mean, guess he's creepy and did creepy things on the set. That's kind of what I had in the back of my mind. I would have gotten up without researching it and made that statement and said, hey, he is creepy and did creepy things. I would never do that about somebody without actually researching it. But just passive observation, that's the impression I had. So I think it's a good argument here, and I would love to see the counter response on how the average or ordinary viewers understand the trailer and quiet on the set to be defamatory. So, oh my gosh, and they're going to quote, so for example, shortly after Quiet on the Set aired, the New York Post, of course the New York Post, ran an article about the docuseries with a picture of Schneider and captioning Schneider as a child abuser, stating, alleged assaulter and Nickelodeon showrunner Dan Schneider accepting Kids' Choice Award. So, when was this Kids' Choice Award given? 2014? But New York Post runs this after this 2024 documentary airs, 10 years after this picture. So where can you conclude that New York Post is stemming from? As another example, shortly after episode 5 on April 10th, 2024, The Hollywood Reporter ran an article about Quiet on the Set and falsely referred to Schneider as a sexual abuser and equated him with convicted felon Peck. So, Hollywood Reporter is echoing that the comparison, the level field, grouping Schneider with Peck. The article discusses the loopholes in policies that, quote, allowed Schneider and his colleague, dialogue coach Brian Peck, to get away with years of sexual abuse. Further, comments on the trailer reveal that viewers understood defendant's statements in the trailer and were quiet on the set to mean that Schneider in fact committed crimes of SA, just like Handy or Peck and other convicted felons. These include, but are not limited to, the following comments. We've got YouTube people appearing in the comments. We're in filings. So here's comments on ID's YouTube channel for the trailer video. Quote, I watched. Dan Schneider, Brian Peck, and Jason Handy need to be in prison. This one's in caps. Dan Schneider, Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, Bill Cosby, the Mount Rushmore of SA. Josh Peck can serve as a tour guide. The trailer and Quiet on Set, our last bit of proof to get him. Schneider finally thrown in prison like Bill Cosby, except, unlike Bill Cosby, Schneider stays in prison and doesn't get let out, kinda like R. Kelly. Dan Schneider needs to go down. He's gross, what a sick predator. Well, we don't know which one this one's actually about. Arrest Dan Schneider. We will see Dan Schneider behind bars. Dan, get in the van, Schneider. I hope that Dan Schneider goes down just like R. Kelly and Harvey after their docuseries. So, similarly, while Quiet on the Set was first premiering, and numerous viewers posting in real time revealed their understanding that the docuseries stated. Yeah, so understanding. That's what I'm saying, it is echoed. Revealed their understanding that the docuseries stated that Schneider is a criminal and sexual abuser. For example, numerous posts on X, so now we're getting it named, formerly Twitter, concluded that Schneider is a, quote, predator, tantamount to Jeffrey Epstein or Bill Cosby. Contemporaneous X posts read, Dan Schneider needs to be in prison immediately. Dan Schneider and Brian Peck really molested, groomed, and are the children of Nickelodeon. Dan Schneider was the Harvey Weinstein of Nickelodeon. If the court can lock up Bill Cosby, Dan Schneider needs to be in jail now. Quiet on the Set, Dark Side of Kids TV, and now a new 4-part docuseries, a look at Nickelodeon, who facilitated Dan Schneider and other pedophiles and child rapists. So they're just focusing on Dan and the others. Dan Schneider ard children and brought other pedophiles onto the set, and they later assaulted and ard children. Raid Dan Schneider next, Quiet on Set. Was this after the Diddy raid? When did this timeline happen? April was an interesting month. So, the Diddy raid. I wonder if that's the reference there, though, raid Dan Schneider next. Indeed, thousands of viewers have posted comments, videos, or other content indicating that they understand the trailer and are Quiet on the Set to be stating or implying that Schneider is a criminal who essayed children on his shows. Further, as set forth above, even Schneider's former colleagues and close friends have interpreted the trailer and Quiet on the Set as falsely stating or implying that Schneider committed acts of children SA. So defendants have essentially admitted that the trailer and Quiet on the Set are defamatory by implication in response to a cease and desist letter sent by counsel for Schneider, demanding that Quiet on the Set, quote, not include any statements that allege or imply that Mr. Schneider engaged in any criminal or sexual misconduct. Defendants' counsel responded that there are, quote, no statements that defame Schneider. Defendants tellingly ignore whether the statements imply that Schneider engaged in criminal or sexual misconduct with respect to children and are therefore defamatory, because defendants know that this is the case. Who's this counsel? I wonder if they're still currently employed as counsel. First cause of action, defamation per se, and we're going to go through, so they went through all the elements to establish the elements throughout the rest of this filing here. You know, it was false, they repeated it, it was knowing, and it was malicious. They're arguing that it was malicious here, not just disregard. And that they had an opportunity to correct it and didn't. They sent a cease and desist letter before it aired. And the counsel was just like, nah, we don't state anything, so it's not defamatory. But that's not how defamation works. It doesn't need to be an explicit statement. It can be an inference or implication. So I think this is actually, there's some weight here, based on what I know, right? I'm coming into it with just, from an outside, from all the way outside, my interpretation is that a lot of people interpreted this documentary to say and mean and imply the things that they're saying were implied. And then as far as damages, I don't think we have a specific number, but they are asking for preliminary or permanent injunctive release, including editing, taking down, or removing all or a portion of the trailer and or Quiet on the Set. You know, attorney's fees, punitive damages, compensatory damages for past and future loss, all of that good stuff. But this little element here is interesting. They said, take it down. Take it down. And then counsel signs. So, and they don't have the pro hoc vice guy sign down here. But there is an application there. And he wants a jury trial. And I will not lie. I didn't really have interest in, you know, this documentary. I didn't have interest in the Peck stuff. Boy, if we get to see someone go up against Warner Brothers and Co., and if it would be televised, I might follow that one. Because, you know, they send in their big guns. I mean, Warner Brothers has, like, buku money. They apparently didn't have good enough money for a defamation counsel that understood that defamation doesn't need to be an explicit statement for something to be defamation, but, you know, siloing one department. But they would come out, if this goes to trial, some big guns be walking into that courtroom. And that would be extremely, extremely interesting. Let's see. Where did I leave off? I'm getting to hear Sue the Hollywood Reporter. So when I had to read that, right, my thought was they had 2 articles on this defamation suit being filed, and now I want to go and look and see how they characterize it. But they didn't link to this filing. And I'm pretty sure I've gotten some filings from Hollywood Reporter before. I'm pretty sure I've seen them, and that could just be a writer difference, or they were short on time, or they couldn't get their hands on it. They were just relying on, I think TMZ first reported on it. But Deadline got it. Happily, they got it. They have their watermark all over it. But Hollywood Reporter wrote 2 articles, and, you know, I'm going to go back and read it and see if it was, like, fair, one-sided, if I think it reflects what I just read. But Wait, what are we talking about? Oh, we're talking about Christy Nome. Oh my God, that puppy story. Pam, you have to cover. Pam, if you're still in this chat, you have to cover the Christy Nome puppy story for stunt shows and shenanigans. And I can jump in with you. My internet, I think, is held up. I don't know what happened with why I had crap internet for a week. It was horrible. But it seems to be fine now. Nobody came to fix it. I don't know what happened. Just, but if you wanted to do talking about the mall no evidence, mall no witnesses, we can do that too. I have stable enough internet to commit to it. And then I didn't watch this documentary. I'm curious about how he was portrayed. Right. And this is like face value. This is written by his counsel here. It's obviously they're making arguments that are favorable to their side. But now I want to know, like, and I don't want to just go watch a documentary as if it was just promoted to me, right? In 5 episodes or however many episodes. I have such a long list of things to watch. But now I'm curious to see the portrayal. Because my understanding of the portrayal was just through other people's commentary about it, who seem to have perceived that Dan Schneider and company all did these horrible things together, or he was complicit in letting them do it. So, and then he didn't essay children, he just put them in position. So Amanda Bynes, on the other hand, he probably definitely, allegedly, was the reason she had an abortion at 13. So that's where this would get really interesting, right? Is if this were to go to trial, the amount of money that could be at stake here. I'm not saying like that's the other burden, right? So a jury could find unequivocally, they could just be like in 100% agreement that this, hypothetically speaking, Dan Schneider was defamed. Warner Brothers defamed him. Maybe they just, I get off vibes from him, and I'm just going to give him $1 in punitive damages. I'm not going to give him any monetary awards. On the flip side, they could just, give him the kitchen sink. Screw these big companies, You never know. But if you have a witness come in, like if Amanda Bynes wanted to come speak, that could be something that shifts the tide of the jury's sympathy significantly. Especially that's probably a familiar face, I think. Anyone that's my age, a little bit older, knows who Amanda Bynes was. She was a staple on TV when I was growing up. And then the documentary didn't call him an essay. They just called out what a gross, disgusting piece. Yeah, so that's the thing. Like, there are some people that I've seen that only just thought he was like creep vibes, right? But I do think there's room. I think there's enough here to say, just simple probability, that it's likely, more likely than not, that a reasonable person watching this could conclude the same defamatory implications that they're alleging here. Right? It's reasonable that they might just get creep vibes but understand nothing more. But it's also reasonable. Oh, we think he did these bad things. That's so immoral. That's criminal. So that will be really interesting to see this response. Because again, we're only looking at one side here. And did they call him a bully? So I do remember, he was hard to work with, hostile, all of that, which I would, parallel. Bully's kind of synonymous with that. You said, you might be onto something. So Barbara says, no, Warner Brothers does not have money anymore. They blew it all in their multi-mergers. They're so deep in the hole. And yeah, that puppy story is a hot mess. Yeah, it is a entire shenanigan. And then Noam is a hotter version of Palin, and considering how much Donald Trump hates dogs, I bet you she's now in the front running in his brain for VP. And then, so Dystopian Justice, sorry, I just haven't had time. I mean, this was honestly a last minute stream that Barbara thinks I was going to do at 8 or 5:30 in the morning her time. So it's on, I don't really have a schedule because I'm still doing things for my day job, but I haven't forgotten about you. And were you still out of town? But I didn't forget about you. I'll put a pin in it. And you guys, for wrapping this up, the complaint, I think I already put the PDF in the description. If you guys want to like read it, reference it, share it around, because it's kind of annoying when certain cases drop and every news press publication is happy to include the full complaint. But then other stories, it's just like everyone's referencing the full complaint. In a copy obtained by us, just share the document then. I don't even care if your watermark's all over it, that's fine. But just share it if you're going to report on it. Let the whole thing be there. Why curate it? Why gatekeep it? So the link to this complaint is in the description. Don't know where this will go, but if this ends up being some big trial in a courtroom with bigwig lawyers from Warner Brothers, I might be interested in looking at it just to see how they spitfire at each other in the courtroom. And so you guys, thanks for tuning in. Thanks so much for bringing so much context on the background of this, because it's blind read for me. And if we have an update anytime soon, we'll get to it.